An airline stewardess named Emily Carter slapped an elderly black man without realizing he was a billionaire. But just 2 minutes later, Emily Carter had to face the biggest shock of her career when relentless revenge struck. This encounter would change Emily Carter's life forever. Jack Harper Dixon stepped into the first-class cabin of the plane. His hands, marked by the passage of time, tightly gripped an old leather briefcase. At 60 years old, his silver hair and gentle eyes spoke of a life filled with experiences. Despite being a billionaire, Jack Harper's appearance was far from ostentatious. He wore a simple light gray suit, looking more like a friendly neighbor than a powerful businessman. As he walked past each row of seats, Jack Harper nodded gently to the other passengers. His soft smile put everyone at ease, even though most didn't realize they were sitting next to one of the wealthiest men in the country. But Jack Harper preferred it this way. He had never liked flamboyance or drawing attention to himself. Upon reaching his seat, Jack Harper slowly placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment. As he settled into the plush leather seat, he let out a sigh of relief. A long day of important meetings, decisions, and weighty discussions had finally come to an end. Now, all he wanted was a peaceful flight home. A flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" "Just water, thank you," Jack Harper replied softly, his deep voice calm. As the flight attendant walked away, Jack Harper gazed out the window, his eyes focused on the bustling airport outside. Childhood memories flooded his mind. He could never have imagined that one day he'd be sitting in first class, let alone owning an entire company. Life had never been easy. Struggles and failures had constantly appeared, but it was those challenges that had shaped the man he was today. Jack Harper closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. To him, what made him proud was not the wealth or success, but the charitable work he had done. Those contributions brought him a joy that no material possession could match. The noise around him grew as the plane filled with passengers. Conversations mingled with footsteps. Jack Harper took out a book from his briefcase, looking forward to immersing himself in its pages. During the flight, as he opened the book, a sense of peace slowly washed over him. At the altitude between layers of clouds, Jack Harper hoped for a brief escape from the pressures of his busy life. But he had no idea that this flight would be anything but peaceful. As the last few passengers boarded, a storm was about to hit, one that would challenge his composure and completely alter his perspective on life. Jack Harper sat back in his first-class seat, his shoulders relaxing as he exhaled deeply. The tension of the day seemed to melt away, and he looked forward to a quiet flight. But that peace was short-lived. Emily Carter, a flight attendant in her early 30s, walked up to him. Her hair was perfectly styled, her uniform sharp as it caught the light. Her eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down, her lips pressed tightly into a cold, straight line. "Excuse me, sir." Emily Carter's voice was sharp and suspicious. "I believe you've entered the wrong cabin. Economy class is in the back." Jack Harper looked up, blinking slightly at the cold tone. He smiled politely and spoke gently. "No, ma'am. My seat is here." When Jack Harper returned from the restroom and sat back down, Emily Carter continued to eye him with clear suspicion. Her eyebrows arched as she scanned him from head to toe, her gaze full of doubt. She quickly glanced around, noticing that the other passengers were beginning to watch the exchange with curiosity. "I need to see your ticket," Emily Carter demanded, holding her hand out, her voice laced with visible skepticism. Jack Harper felt a familiar pang in his chest. This wasn't the first time he had faced such treatment, but it never got easier. Nevertheless, he remained calm, refusing to let Emily Carter's rudeness affect him. His hands moved slowly into his jacket pocket, retrieving his ticket and handing it to her, his expression unfazed, his demeanor still composed. Emily Carter snatched the ticket from his hand, her eyes cold as she held it up to the light, turning it over as if searching for signs of forgery. The other passengers around them fell silent, the air growing heavy. Some looked down, avoiding the scene, but the discomfort was palpable. "Is there a problem?" Jack Harper asked quietly, his voice steady, though he couldn't help feeling humiliated by the public questioning. Emily Carter's eyes shifted from the ticket to his face, then back to the ticket once more. It was clear she couldn't believe that this simple, unassuming man could belong in first class. "This ticket seems unusual," Emily Carter said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I need to verify it with the gate agent." Jack Harper took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he fought to maintain his composure. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, some curious, some sympathetic, but he refused to let Emily Carter's disrespect shake him. "Take as long as you need," he responded, his voice calm and firm. Jack Harper spoke slowly, his tone even. "I assure you, everything is in order." Emily Carter spun on her heel, her footsteps forceful as she walked off to verify his ticket. Jack Harper closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging as he let the fatigue wash over him. In his mind, memories of the tough road he had traveled resurfaced. Those challenges that had once tested him now felt like another obstacle to overcome. His lips tightened and then parted as he let out a quiet sigh. Opening his eyes, Jack Harper looked around the cabin. He offered a light smile to the passengers watching closely. His calm demeanor and self-control in the face of this situation spoke volumes, more than any angry outburst ever could. Emily Carter returned, her face flushed, her hands clutching the ticket tightly. She threw it back at Jack Harper, her hand trembling slightly as she did. "Looks like the ticket is valid," she muttered through clenched teeth, her voice reluctant. "But there must have been some mix-up. Perhaps you meant to book a seat in economy class." Jack Harper took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling. His gaze slowly turned toward Emily Carter, his voice still composed, but there was an undercurrent of exhaustion in his words. "There was no mix-up, ma'am. This is my seat, and I have every right to be here." Emily Carter's face grew even redder, the flush spreading from her cheeks to her temples. Her eyes darted around at the passengers, who were no longer hiding their interest in the situation. "Sir, I demand that you lower your voice," she hissed, her tone quiet but sharp like a knife. "You're being disrespectful to me and the other first-class passengers." Jack Harper blinked in surprise. He had never raised his voice, not even slightly. His lips parted, ready to speak. But before he could utter a word, Emily Carter's hand swung through the air and struck him sharply across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, the sharp crack slicing through the silence. Jack Harper's head jerked to the side from the force of the blow. The sharp intake of breath from the passengers filled the air. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Jack Harper slowly turned his head back, his eyes meeting Emily Carter's gaze. He gently lifted his hand, his fingers brushing against the stinging side of his face. His eyes widened slightly, a mix of pain and disbelief clearly etched on his features. Emily Carter stood frozen in place, her arms still raised, as if she herself couldn't believe what she had just done. Her face was pale, the once proud features now replaced with shock as she realized the severe consequences of her recent action. The cabin fell into a suffocating silence. Passengers stared, mouths agape, eyes wide with disbelief at the scene before them. Some quickly pulled out their phones, while others whispered to one another, their voices tinged with concern. Jack Harper remained still, but the calmness that usually defined him had been shaken. His shoulders trembled slightly, his breath becoming heavier. He looked at Emily Carter, his eyes reflecting deep hurt, but still holding on to a resilient determination. He took a deep breath, feeling the sharp sting of the slap still lingering on his cheek. Then, he fixed his gaze on Emily Carter, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and an unwavering resolve. Jack Harper looked directly at Emily Carter, his eyes narrowing, his voice low but clear. "Why did you slap me?" Emily Carter bit her lip, her face flushed, but she held her posture firmly. Her voice trembled slightly, as if struggling to maintain control. "You disrespected me," she said, her gaze avoiding his. "This is first class, and we need to uphold standards." Jack Harper slowly shook his head, his expression one of disbelief at the words he had just heard. His lips parted as if to respond, but a soft ping from the phone in his pocket made him pause. He glanced down at the screen, his eyebrows raising slightly as he read the message. As Emily Carter continued to express her displeasure, Jack Harper quietly skimmed through the message. It confirmed that his company had just completed the acquisition of the parent company of this airline, a project he had been secretly working on for months. A faint smile crossed his lips as he returned the phone to his pocket, not saying a word. As the plane began to taxi for takeoff, Jack Harper took out his phone again. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, typing a concise message to the airline's CEO. He summarized the incident in clear, direct language, demanding an immediate internal investigation into Emily Carter's behavior. Once the message was sent, he leaned back in his seat, staring out the window, though a plan was already taking shape in his mind. Jack Harper decided to keep the news of his new ownership a secret. There was no need to create a scene or attract more attention. He chose to act quietly, observing and gathering more information throughout the flight. Over the next hours, Jack Harper kept his eyes on Emily Carter. He noticed how she tried to avoid the area where he sat, delegating her duties to other flight attendants whenever possible. When she had to pass by him, her steps were stiff, her gaze flicking quickly to him before darting away. Jack Harper observed every move Emily Carter made as she served other passengers. He noticed a clear difference in how she treated them. For most passengers, she maintained a polite but distant demeanor. For some, she appeared especially attentive, while her attitude toward passengers of different skin tones grew noticeably colder. Every small detail was noted by Jack Harper, each observation adding to the growing picture of Emily Carter, the person who had quickly passed judgment on him. As the flight continued, Jack Harper's mind was racing. He thought about the changes that needed to be made. Though the incident pained him, he saw it as a valuable opportunity to better understand the issues that plagued the airline. Jack Harper was determined to turn this experience into motivation for positive reforms, not only for himself but for all the passengers who might face similar discrimination. His chest tightened as he witnessed a sad sight before him. An elderly woman, her neatly bundled gray hair, struggled with a heavy handbag, trying to lift it into the overhead compartment. She glanced around, her eyes pleading for help. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice trembling as she tried to summon courage. "Could someone help me?" Emily Carter stood nearby, arranging items on her service cart. She briefly glanced at the woman, their eyes meeting for a moment of silent plea, but then quickly turned away, pretending not to hear the request. Jack Harper narrowed his eyes, his brow furrowing as he saw Emily Carter redirect her attention. At that moment, a white passenger a few rows ahead raised his hand. "Excuse me, flight attendant, could I have another pillow?" the man asked. Immediately, Emily Carter changed her tone. A bright smile appeared on her face as she hurried over to the man. "Of course, sir. I'll bring it right over," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. Jack Harper gritted his teeth as he watched the scene unfold. The stark contrast in Emily Carter's treatment was impossible to ignore. He felt a heavy wave of emotion wash over him, not just because the elderly woman was still struggling with her bag, but because of the larger issue unfolding right before his eyes. Unable to sit still any longer, Jack Harper stood up and walked over to the woman. "Let me help you," he said gently. The woman's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, young man. These old bones aren't what they used to be," she chuckled softly, her voice gentle but tinged with exhaustion. Jack Harper carefully lifted the bag and placed it in the overhead compartment. As he did so, he felt Emily Carter's gaze on him from afar. Her face showed a mix of emotions, some embarrassment, some stubbornness, and perhaps even a hint of regret. When he returned to his seat, Jack Harper's mind was whirling with thoughts. What had just occurred strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about Emily Carter's behavior. It was a symptom of deeper problems within the airline system. He pulled a tablet from his bag and began jotting down ideas. Diversity and inclusion training programs, improving hiring processes, establishing clear principles for supporting all passengers, regardless of their appearance. The list of changes grew longer, as if a comprehensive vision for the airline's cultural shift was gradually taking shape in his mind. As the flight continued, Jack Harper couldn't stop thinking about everything that had just transpired. With a heavy heart, he pulled out his phone, determined to dig deeper into the airline's history. His fingers moved quickly over the screen, searching for complaints or issues that had surfaced in the past. What he found made his stomach drop. Page after page of complaints about discriminatory behavior from the flight attendants appeared on the screen. Jack Harper's eyes widened as he scrolled through the endless list of complaints. The words on the screen seemed to weigh heavily on him. His brow furrowed, and his lips moved in disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend what he was reading. "This can't be true," he muttered, shaking his head slightly in helplessness and shock. As he continued reading, a familiar name jumped out at him: Emily Carter. A slew of specific complaints mentioned her by name. Jack Harper's jaw clenched as his eyes skimmed the details. Ignored or rude treatment toward passengers of color, elderly passengers not receiving the necessary assistance, and even open hostility toward those who didn't fit Emily Carter's narrow view of what a first-class passenger should be. One particular complaint made his finger pause on the screen. The story of a young mother traveling with her biracial child appeared, heartbreaking in its detail. The mother's words jumped out of the screen. "I felt humiliated and angry. My child asked why that flight attendant didn't like us. How do I explain that to a 5-year-old?" Jack Harper's breath caught in his chest. His throat tightened, and he felt his eyes well up, though no tears fell. The image of the child and its innocent but painful question evoked memories from his own past. Times he had faced discrimination. His hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down, as if the weight of the story had overwhelmed his entire body. Jack Harper continued reading, each line carving itself into his mind. The problem went far beyond a single flight attendant. The sheer number of complaints and the airline's superficial responses revealed a severe systemic issue. This wasn't just about individual behavior, but a deeply rooted cultural problem that had festered and spread over time. Jack Harper sat up straighter, his shoulders taut, as if bracing for the weight of the responsibility ahead. With every passing moment, his resolve grew stronger. He understood that addressing Emily Carter's actions was only the first step. What was needed was a complete overhaul, from policy to corporate culture. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he began to jot down ideas. Grand plans began to form in his mind: mandatory cultural sensitivity training, a total revamp of the complaint handling process, and a zero-tolerance policy for any discriminatory behavior. Lifting his eyes from the phone, Jack's gaze landed on Emily Carter. She was serving drinks a few rows ahead, her movements efficient yet detached. He studied her, seeing not just the individual who had wronged him but a representation of a much larger, more profound issue. His chest felt heavy, weighed down by the injustice he had witnessed, yet his eyes burned with an unyielding determination. Jack Harper leaned back in his first-class seat, his mind churning with relentless ideas. His fingers tightened around the stylus as he began sketching out his plans on his phone. A deep breath escaped his chest, his shoulders lowering slightly. He quickly jotted down: start with mandatory company-wide empathy and cultural sensitivity training. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, his hand moving steadily as thoughts poured out. Jack Harper believed education was the key to shifting perspectives and behaviors. He envisioned a program designed to expand awareness and foster understanding among all employees, from the CEO to the baggage handlers. He whispered firmly to himself, "We have to rebuild from the foundation." The stylus moved purposefully across the screen, capturing specific ideas. He decided to focus especially on the flight attendants, like Emily Carter, who regularly interacted with passengers. These frontline employees were the face of the airline, and their actions could define an entire passenger experience. The blueprint for change grew clearer in Jack Harper's mind. He resolved to implement this initiative quietly, without fanfare or public announcements. This wasn't about garnering attention or making headlines. It was about enacting genuine, lasting change. As Jack scanned the cabin, his eyes returned to Emily Carter. She was assisting nearby passengers, her demeanor composed yet distant. His jaw tightened momentarily, but his gaze softened. The anger he felt toward her actions mingled with sadness for the harm she had caused, and somewhere deep within, a flicker of hope sparked. Perhaps, with the right guidance and education, even people like Emily Carter could change and grow. Jack Harper knew that merely punishing Emily Carter wasn't enough. It might satisfy an immediate sense of justice, but it wouldn't address the deeper, systemic issues within the airline. No, he needed to do more. He envisioned workshops where employees could share experiences and learn from one another. He imagined team-building activities to break down barriers and cultivate empathy. In his mind, he painted a picture of a workplace where every employee, from pilots to gate agents, understood the importance of treating every passenger with respect and dignity. As the flight progressed, Jack's determination intensified. This wasn't just a business decision. It was an opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. Jack Harper knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them. When the plane landed, he remained seated, allowing other passengers to disembark first. His eyes followed Emily Carter as she busied herself helping passengers retrieve their belongings. Her gestures became gentler with certain passengers, while a palpable detachment lingered with others. Jack Harper sighed, the sound soft but heavy with meaning. Gathering his belongings, Jack exited the aircraft. He offered a polite nod to the crew, including Emily Carter, but she merely glanced at him without a word. As he walked down the jet bridge toward the terminal, he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. Begin the process. Keep it discreet. In the days that followed, Jack Harper's acquisition of the airline remained confidential. The internal investigation into Emily Carter's behavior began quietly, with HR representatives discreetly interviewing passengers and crew members who had witnessed the incident. Meanwhile, Jack's team worked tirelessly, drafting new policies and training programs. They pored over every page of the employee handbook, diversity guidelines, and customer service protocols, determined to create a comprehensive plan for change. Unaware of the storm brewing around her, Emily Carter continued her daily routine. She arrived at work each morning in her crisp uniform, a bright smile on her face, greeting her colleagues cheerfully. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She believed she was simply upholding the high standards of first-class service. During a coffee break, Emily Carter casually recounted the recent incident to a colleague. She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. He thought he could embarrass me just because I was doing my job. Some people don't understand how first class operates. Her colleague shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, but said nothing. Rumors of the investigation were quietly spreading, making the atmosphere among the staff tense. As days passed, Jack Harper received regular updates on the investigation's progress and drafts of the new policies. He read each line carefully, his brow furrowed as he added notes and suggestions. During a team meeting, he emphasized, "We're not just changing policies on paper. Our goal is to transform the culture of this airline. This is about creating an environment where every employee and passenger feels respected and valued." One morning, Emily Carter's day began like any other. She arrived at the airport, with her uniform pressed and her hair neatly pinned. Walking through the employee entrance, she noticed a few colleagues glancing her way and whispering. Emily shrugged it off, assuming they were gossiping about office trivialities. But when she reached her locker, an envelope awaited her. She frowned, tearing it open to read the contents. Her eyes widened, her grip tightening on the paper. She muttered through clenched teeth, "Mandatory cultural sensitivity training? Unbelievable." She crumpled the notice in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Emily Carter's cheeks flushed, her skin turning a deep red. Having served as a flight attendant for over a decade, Emily prided herself on her exceptional first-class service. The notion that she needed cultural sensitivity training felt like a slap in the face. Throughout her shift, the notice weighed heavily on her mind. Each time she served a drink or handed out a pillow, her hands were stiffer than usual, her steps slightly less assured. During a break, Emily Carter sat across from Lisa, her friend and colleague. She tossed the crumpled notice onto the table and pointed at it, her voice brimming with indignation. "Can you believe this? They're forcing me to attend this so-called sensitivity training, as if I don't know how to treat passengers." Lisa hesitated for a moment, her eyes avoiding Emily's, before speaking softly but cautiously. "Maybe it's not such a bad thing, Beth. Sometimes we all need a refresher on the basics." Emily Carter stared at Lisa, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together. "Are you saying I'm insensitive?" Lisa quickly corrected herself, her voice uneasy. No. What I mean is, times are changing. Maybe the company just wants to make sure we're all on the same page." Emily Carter shot up from her chair, the sound of it scraping against the floor echoing through the break room. Her shoulders were rigid, her gaze fiery. I don't need to understand anything more. I know how to do my job, and I do it well. This is a waste of time. With determined steps, she stormed out of the room, her heels striking the floor with every stride. Her thoughts surged like a storm. She would attend the training, of course, but she proved to them that Emily Carter Williams didn't need anyone to teach her how to treat passengers. Yet, Emily Carter had no idea that her stubbornness was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. As the sunlight crept over the city skyline, Jack Harper Dixon sat in his new office at the airline's headquarters. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen as passenger complaint reports scrolled past. His finger moved slowly on the mouse, and each new line of text deepened the furrow between his brows. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered, shaking his head. In recent days, Jack had been reviewing not only Emily Carter's records, but those of other crew members as well. A troubling pattern emerged. Complaints of discrimination based on race, age, and appearance had accumulated over the years with little meaningful action taken. Leaning back in his chair, Jack gazed into the distance, his mind racing for solutions. He knew the mandatory training was only a starting point. To truly transform the company culture, he needed to create a system where every voice was heard. Eyes gleaming with determination, Jack picked up his phone and dialed his executive director, Sarah. His voice was firm yet calm. "Sarah, I need you to arrange a meeting with the tech team. We're going to implement an anonymous feedback system for passengers." Over the next few hours, the glow of the computer screen illuminated Jack's resolute expression as he worked tirelessly, one step at a time, toward meaningful change. Jack and his team worked around the clock to design a user-friendly app. It would allow passengers to rate their experiences and submit detailed feedback without fear of retaliation. The data would be collected and analyzed, enabling Jack to pinpoint and address underlying issues promptly. As the workday dragged on, Jack's shoulders began to sag from exhaustion, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen, shifting his focus to complaints involving Emily Carter. He picked up her file, his hands tightening as he scanned the reports, noting recurring patterns in her behavior across multiple incidents. These weren't isolated cases. They reflected a deeply ingrained attitude. Jack set the file down, leaning back in his chair before turning to his HR director during a late afternoon meeting. "We can't just punish her," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to give her a chance to understand and grow." Together, they crafted a tailored improvement plan for Emily Carter. It included not only cultural sensitivity training, but also one-on-one mentoring and community engagement programs. Jack hoped that by exposing Emily to diverse experiences, she might begin to see the world through a different lens. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its final rays cast long shadows across the office floor. Jack surveyed the day's progress. The anonymous feedback system was underway, the training programs were being expanded, and plans to address individual cases like Emily's were in motion. Though his eyes betrayed his fatigue, a quiet resolve shone within them. He knew changing an entire company's culture wouldn't happen overnight, but as he gazed out over the city below, a flicker of hope stirred. With patience, determination, and compassion, he believed he could transform the airline into a model of inclusivity and respect. On a brisk Monday morning, Emily Carter arrived at the airline's training center. Her lips pressed tightly together, her steps brisk yet heavy. Checking her watch, she sighed and pushed open the large glass doors. The waiting area was packed with flight attendants, all preparing for the mandatory cultural sensitivity training. "What a waste of time," she muttered under her breath, stomping slightly harder as she approached the reception desk to sign in. The training room was arranged with round tables, each surrounded by 6 chairs. Emily chose a seat near the back, folding her arms as she sat down. Her shoulders were stiff, her back rested defensively against the chair, and her gaze fixated on the clock on the wall, ignoring her colleagues who joined her table. When Mina, the cheerful instructor, began the session, Emily sat motionless, her eyes barely blinking, her foot tapping lightly against the floor. Her indifference was palpable in every movement. "Today, we'll explore various scenarios and discuss how to approach them with empathy and respect," Mina announced enthusiastically. Emily Carter's face briefly contorted with irritation before she turned away. When Mina invited the group to share experiences of cultural misunderstandings, Emily remained silent. She doodled aimlessly on her notepad, occasionally sneaking glances at her phone beneath the table. "Emily, would you like to share your thoughts?" Mina asked, noticing her lack of engagement. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide, as though caught off guard. "I have nothing to say," she replied flatly. "I've always done my job just fine." Mina nodded, her smile unwavering. "There's always room to grow and learn, isn't there?" Emily shrugged, returning to her notepad, oblivious to the concerned glances exchanged between Mina and her assistant, who silently adjusted a camera in the back of the room. During role-playing exercises, Emily participated half-heartedly. Her responses were curt and detached. When asked how she would assist a non-English-speaking passenger, Emily sighed, rolling her eyes slightly. "I just speak louder and slower," she said. "That usually works." Mina gently suggested alternative approaches, but Emily waved her off dismissively. "Look, we can't do everything for everyone," she said firmly. "Sometimes they need to adapt to us." The room fell silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Emily remained oblivious to the weight of her words, her eyes darting back to the clock, eager for the session to end. As the training wrapped up, Mina asked each participant to share one takeaway from the session. When it was Emily's turn, she shrugged. "I guess I learned we have to tiptoe around everyone's feelings now," she said sarcastically. "Wouldn't want to upset anyone just by doing our job." Mina's smile faltered for a brief moment, but quickly recovered. "Thank you for your honesty, Emily," she said gently. "I hope when you reflect on today's session, you'll find more positive insights." Emily gathered her belongings, eager to leave. She paid no attention to the assistant packing up the camera equipment, which had captured every moment of her defiance throughout the session. Back in his office, Jack Harper steepled his fingers beneath his chin, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed Emily Carter's file. As Jack Harper read the report, he realized this was more than just a case of a rude flight attendant. He murmured, leaning back in his chair, closing the file, and gazing out the window. His mind raced. "This isn't just about punishing her," he said aloud. "It's about breaking the cycle." Picking up his phone, Jack dialed his HR director, Janet. "I've been thinking about the pilot program we discussed, the one addressing workplace bias." "Yes, Mr. Harper," Janet replied. "We're still in the planning stages." "I want to expedite it," Jack said firmly but calmly. "And I've already identified the first participant." He detailed his findings about Emily Carter and expressed his desire to include her in the program. Janet listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Are you certain?" Janet asked when Jack finished. Considering her recent behavior, some might see this as being overly lenient. Jack smiled faintly, even though Janet couldn't see him. "Sometimes, Janet, the people who need help the most are the ones who don't realize it." After ending the call, Jack leaned back in his chair, a mix of hope and determination coursing through him. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Emily Carter's biases were deeply ingrained, shaped over years in a community that reinforced them. But he also believed in the power of education and exposure to different perspectives. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow," he murmured, his gaze falling on a framed photo on his desk. It showed a younger version of himself, standing proudly in front of his first successful business. "Lord knows I've had my share of second chances." Jack began sketching out ideas for the program. It needed to be comprehensive, tackling not just workplace behavior but the roots of bias itself. He envisioned workshops, one-on-one coaching sessions, and even community outreach initiatives. As he worked, a sense of renewed purpose swelled within him. This wasn't just about transforming one person or one airline. It was about creating a ripple effect that could touch countless lives. The next morning, Emily Carter walked into the staff lounge, her head held high despite the gnawing anxiety in her gut. As she approached the coffee machine, she noticed a group of colleagues whispering. When they saw her, they quickly dispersed, avoiding eye contact. "Good morning," she said, forcing a cheerful tone. No one responded. Pouring herself a cup of coffee, she felt her hands tremble slightly. This had been happening more and more lately. People were acting strangely around her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she stirred her coffee, her supervisor, Mark, called from the doorway. "Emily, could you step into my office for a moment?" Her heart pounded, but she managed to smile. "Of course," she replied, setting her cup down with a slight tremor in her hands. In Mark's office, the tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Emily, I've received some reports about your recent behavior on flights." Emily's face flushed. "Reports? What do you mean?" Shifting in his seat, Mark hesitated. "There have been complaints about, well, unprofessional conduct towards certain passengers." Emily's chest tightened, anger rising. "I hold the highest standards in first class. If passengers can't meet those standards, that's not my fault." Mark's gaze hardened. "This isn't about standards, Emily. It's about how you treat people." As she left Mark's office, Emily felt as though the walls were closing in on her. She couldn't believe this was happening. She'd always taken pride in doing her job well, maintaining order in the cabin. In the days that followed, things only got worse. Her flight schedules changed unexpectedly, pairing her with unfamiliar crews who seemed to monitor her every move. One afternoon, while reviewing the passenger list for her next flight, she overheard two attendants whispering. "Have you heard about Emily Carter?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "I heard there's an investigation, something about discrimination." Emily froze, her heart stopping. Investigation? Discrimination? The words echoed in her mind, leaving her feeling dizzy. During her next flight, Emily found herself questioning every action. When a passenger asked for help with luggage, she hesitated, unsure if her response would be scrutinized. Serving drinks, she agonized over the order in which she approached passengers. By the end of the flight, she was utterly drained. As she packed up to leave, she caught her reflection in a window. The confident, assertive flight attendant she once knew seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone riddled with uncertainty and fear. In his office, Jack Harper stared intently at his computer screen, tracking Emily's progress through the training program over the past few weeks. He carefully reviewed her interactions and the reports. "How's she doing?" Loretta, his assistant, asked, setting a fresh cup of coffee on his desk. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's hard to say. Sometimes, it feels like she's making strides. But then..." He clicked through a series of videos showing Emily in various training scenarios. In one, she seemed deeply engaged, asking thoughtful questions about cultural sensitivity. In another, her body language conveyed discomfort and resistance. "It's like she's fighting herself," Jack mused. "She wants to change, but her old habits run deep." Loretta nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "What's your next move?" Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression resolute. "It's time to push her further. She needs to confront her past behavior head-on." Opening a document on his screen, he pointed to it. "This time, it'll be a public acknowledgment," he said. "It's risky, but I believe it's necessary." The plan was ambitious. Emily would stand before her colleagues and some of the passengers she had wronged, publicly addressing her past mistakes and sharing the lessons she'd learned. "Are you sure?" Loretta asked, concern evident in her voice. "This could backfire." Jack nodded slowly. "I know it's a gamble, but Emily needs this push. She's been hiding behind walls of defensiveness for too long. It's time she faces the truth about her actions." He turned to the window, looking down at the bustling airport below. This is her chance to show real growth, to prove she can change. If she succeeds, it'll not only help her but also inspire others in the company to confront their own biases. "And if she fails?" Loretta asked. Jack turned back, his face serious. "Then we'll know we did everything we could. But I still have hope for Emily. I've seen glimpses of the person she could become." Returning to his desk, Jack picked up the phone. "Let's schedule a meeting with the training coordinators. We need to prepare Emily for what's ahead." As Jack began making calls, the weight of his decision settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew the next step would challenge Emily to her core, pushing her to her limits. But he also believed it was necessary, not just for her, but for the entire airline. Emily Carter's hands trembled as she read the email on her phone. Her heart raced, and cold sweat began to bead on her forehead. Her throat felt dry, her head spinning. The upcoming training session wasn't just another routine meeting. It was going to be broadcast live to every employee in the company. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet break room. "This can't be happening." She scrolled through the email again, hoping she had misread it, but there it was, clear as day. The next training session will be live-streamed as part of the company's transparency and development initiative. Her first thought was panic. Everyone will see me, she thought. Her colleagues, her supervisors, even the new airline owners. Worst of all, she would have to talk about that day. The day she faced the passenger who turned out to be Jack Harper. As the days passed, Emily's anxiety grew. She lay awake at night, her mind replaying the incident over and over. The memory of her actions made her face burn with shame, her lips moving as if rehearsing an apology. "What was I thinking?" she muttered, curling into a restless heap on her bed. "How could I have been so blind?" The night before the live broadcast, Emily sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered notes and talking points. She had tried to prepare, crafting words that might justify her actions, but everything she wrote felt hollow and insincere. "I can't do this," she said, pushing her chair back in frustration. "I can't stand in front of everyone and admit how wrong I was." But deep down, Emily knew she had no other choice. This was her chance to show she had learned from her mistakes, to prove she could change. With hands still shaking, she picked up her pen again. This time, she didn't look for excuses. She focused on the truth. She wrote about her biases, her flawed assumptions, and the harm she had caused. When dawn broke on the day of the live stream, Emily felt a mix of fear and resolve. She carefully put on her uniform, smoothing every crease as though she could erase the wrinkles of her past mistakes. At the training center, her stomach churned as she watched the tech crew set up cameras and microphones. The reality of what she was about to do crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Miss Carter, we're ready for you," a young technician said, his face full of encouragement. "Just look at the main camera and try to forget about the live stream. You've got this." Emily nodded, too overwhelmed to respond, and stepped to the front of the room. It felt like walking in slow motion. The lights were blinding, the silence deafening. She took a deep breath, standing face to face with the camera. In that moment, Emily Carter knew everything was about to change. Her reputation, her career, her sense of self, all of it hinged on what she was about to say. With her hands clenched together, trembling slightly, she began. "Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm here to talk about an incident that occurred on one of our flights." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "I made a grave mistake. I treated a passenger unfairly because of the color of his skin." As she recounted the incident involving Jack Harper, a lump formed in her throat, and her breaths grew shallow. "I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment and hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Tears slid down her cheeks as she continued. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on why I acted the way I did. This isn't easy to admit, but I grew up in an environment where thoughts like these were normalized. But that's no excuse. I should have known better." Just as Emily began to express her remorse and understanding of her actions, a commotion erupted off camera. The communications director hurriedly entered the room, whispering urgently to the producer. Emily faltered, confusion washing over her. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The producer motioned for her to continue, but Emily could see the unease on everyone's faces. Stumbling through the remainder of her prepared speech, her mind raced with unanswered questions. The moment the broadcast ended, chaos broke loose in the room. Fragments of conversations reached Emily's ears. "Breaking news: airline under fire for PR stunt." It felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. A major news outlet had just published a scathing article criticizing the airline's new policies, including the training program Emily was part of. The story quickly gained traction, exposing the company's efforts as little more than a superficial attempt to save face. It questioned the sincerity of the initiatives and pointed out the lack of systemic change. A wave of despair crashed over Emily. Just as she had begun to believe in the possibility of change, not just for herself but for the company, everything fell apart. She wondered if her words had meant anything at all. Jack Harper was inundated with calls from board members and stakeholders. The negative press threatened to undo all the progress they had made. He knew he had to act quickly to show that the changes were genuine. After ending another tense phone call, Jack Harper ran a hand over his face, the weight of the challenge ahead pressing down on him. He had believed in the power of transformation, both personal and organizational, but now he had to prove that their efforts were more than surface level. The following day, Jack Harper sat at the head of a large conference room table, his expression calm and resolute. He had called an all-hands meeting in response to the backlash. The room was packed with employees, from flight attendants to senior executives. Emily sat near the back, glancing around nervously. "Thank you all for coming," Jack began, his voice steady. "Today, we're going to hear from some of our passengers. Their stories are important, and I ask you to listen with open hearts and minds." One by one, passengers stepped up to the microphone. Their accounts were raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of the discrimination they had faced while flying. A young Muslim woman spoke about being asked to change seats because another passenger felt uncomfortable sitting next to her. A Latino man described being repeatedly questioned about his first-class ticket. Each story hung heavily in the air, punctuated only by soft gasps or muffled sobs. Emily sat silently, her face growing paler with each account. She saw herself in these stories, and the weight of her own mistakes churned in her stomach. Then, an elderly black woman approached the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "I remember asking for help with my bag," she began, her voice wavering. "The flight attendant looked right past me, as if I wasn't even there. But when a white passenger asked for help right after, she smiled and helped immediately." Emily's eyes widened in recognition. This was the moment Jack Harper had witnessed on that fateful flight. A lump formed in her throat as the woman continued. "To some, it might seem like a small thing, but it hurt. It made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter." Tears streamed down Emily's face. Only now did she fully grasp the impact of her actions. What she had once dismissed as insignificant had deeply hurt someone else. The weight of her past behavior crushed her as the stories continued. Each one felt like a dagger to the heart, forcing everyone in the room to confront the deep-seated racism within their industry. Employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, many grappling with the consequences of their actions, or their inaction, for the first time. Jack Harper observed the room closely, noting every reaction. He saw shock, guilt, and slowly, understanding. But his gaze often returned to Emily Carter. As Jack Harper looked around the room, his gaze softened as he noticed tears streaming down her cheeks. She seemed to retreat further into herself with every story shared. When the final speaker concluded, Jack stood up, his voice tight with emotion, barely able to keep his composure. "Thank you for your bravery in sharing your stories," he began, his tone thick with sincerity. "This is why we're here, why we strive to make a difference, not for recognition, not for profit, but because it is simply the right thing to do." As the forum neared its end, a trembling voice broke through the somber silence. I'd like to say a few words, if I may." Emily Carter spoke, her voice shaky yet determined. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward. Jack nodded, silently encouraging her to continue. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling as they clutched the lectern. "My name is Emily Carter," she began, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. "And I'm here to admit that I've been part of the problem." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Emily swallowed hard before continuing. "I grew up in a small town where everyone looked just like me. We never talked about diversity or inclusion. We just lived in the comfort of our own shadows." She paused, gathering the courage to go on. "When I became a flight attendant, I carried those biases with me, unaware of the harm I was causing. But listening to the stories today, I've come to realize how my actions have hurt others." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she pressed forward. "I treated passengers differently based solely on how they looked. I ignored some, favored others, and for that, I am deeply ashamed." The room fell silent. every eye on Emily, every ear straining to catch her words. But shame alone isn't enough, she said, her voice gaining strength. I need to change. We all do. It's not easy to confront the beliefs we've held onto for a lifetime, but it is necessary. Her eyes scanned the audience, meeting the gazes of a few passengers who had shared their stories earlier. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I am truly sorry for the pain I've caused, and I promise, from this day forward, I will do better. I will be better. As she finished, a small round of applause broke out, with some in the room nodding, in appreciation of her honesty. While others remained skeptical, arms crossed and brows furrowed, Jack Harper stood nearby, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He knew Emily's journey would be a long one, but this was an essential first step. When the forum concluded, Jack approached Emily, his expression gentle but serious. Emily, may I have a word with you in private? He asked. Emily nodded, her heart racing as she followed him to a quiet corner of the room, away from the dispersing crowd. Jack took a deep breath before speaking. Emily, there's something I need to tell you. His eyes locked onto hers, steady and intent. Do you remember the passenger you argued with on Flight 1023 last month? Emily's face turned pale. Of course, she remembered. That incident had set everything in motion. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's gaze didn't waver as he delivered the truth. That passenger was me. The words hit Emily like a slap. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Oh my God, she choked out. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Jack raised a hand, cutting her off. That day, I was furious, he said, his voice low and steady. What you did was wrong on so many levels. Tears filled Emily's eyes as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. She hadn't just mistreated any passenger. She had wronged the man who now owned the airline. But Jack's tone softened. Still, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity to use that incident as a catalyst for real change within this company. Emily stared at him, a mix of confusion and remorse etched on her face. You mean, you didn't fire me on the spot? Jack shook his head. No, I believe that simply firing you wouldn't solve the deeper issue. Instead, I wanted to address the root cause of the biases that exist within this airline. Emily was stunned. She had expected punishment, not understanding. I don't know what to say, she mumbled, quickly wiping away her tears. You don't need to say anything, Jack replied gently. Just keep learning. Keep growing. That's all I ask. Emily nodded, a whirlwind of emotions churning within her. Shame, for her past actions mingled with gratitude for this unexpected chance at redemption. Thank you, she murmured. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn and grow. I promise I won't let you down. Jack's smile was warm but resolute. I believe in you, Emily. Now, let's work together to make this airline a place where everyone feels welcomed and respected. He paused, his gaze unwavering. I have a proposition for you, he said, his tone calm yet firm. Emily lifted her head, her eyes wide with uncertainty. A proposition, she echoed, her voice trembling. Jack nodded. I want to offer you a leadership role in our new cultural initiative. Emily's jaw dropped. Out of all the outcomes she had envisioned, this was not one of them. Me? She stammered, barely able to find her voice. Why? Because you've lived it, Jack explained, his expression earnest. You've experienced firsthand how deeply ingrained biases can shape our actions, and now you're learning how to overcome them. Emily listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. Let me be clear, Jack continued, his voice firm. This isn't a reward. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to make amends by helping others learn from your mistakes. Emily nodded slowly, fully grasping the weight of what Jack was offering. This wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. You'll work directly with our training team, Jack explained. You'll share your story, lead discussions, and help develop new programs to address bias within the company. As Jack spoke, Emily felt a shift within her. The shame that had consumed her began to transform into something else, determination. I don't know what to say, Emily said softly. I'm honored that you would trust me with this after everything that's happened. Jack smiled gently. It's not about trust, Emily. It's about growth. You've shown that you're capable of change, and now I'm asking you to help others do the same. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the task ahead. But instead of fear, she felt a newfound sense of purpose. I accept, she said, her voice steadier than before. I want to make this right. Jack nodded in approval. Good. But remember, this journey isn't just about changing others. It's about continuing to change yourself. Emily understood. Her transformation was far from complete. Challenges lay ahead, moments of doubt and difficulty, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. I'm ready, Emily said, her voice filled with a new resolve. I promise to approach this with humility and compassion. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to doing better for myself, for the passengers I've wronged, and for the entire airline. Jack smiled, seeing the sincerity in Emily's eyes. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he believed in the power of second chances. In that moment, watching Emily's transformation, he felt confident that real change was possible. The first day of redemption, it was Emily Carter's first day at her new job, and her chest swelled with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Jack Harper stood at the front of the room, surrounded by a diverse group of trainers. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Emily Carter, Jack said, gesturing toward her. She'll be working with us to develop new cultural sensitivity workshops. The room fell silent. Emily felt the weight of every gaze on her, heavy and probing. She knew many in the room were aware of her past actions, and she could sense their skepticism. Taking a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly, she began to speak. I know some of you may be wondering why I'm here, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I've made mistakes in the past, but I'm here because I want to make things right. I want to help others learn from my missteps. Over the days that followed, Emily poured her heart into her work. She spent countless hours researching, brainstorming ideas with trainers, and sharing her own experiences. It was not an easy journey. Whispers followed her through the halls, and doubtful glances shadowed her steps. One afternoon, during a team meeting, a trainer named Ethan Taylor stood up and bluntly asked, How do we know you've really changed? How do we know this isn't just a performance? The room froze. Emily felt her ears burn and her cheeks flush, but she met Ethan's gaze steadily. That's a fair question, she replied, her voice calm. I can't prove my sincerity with words alone, but I hope my actions and my dedication to this program will show you that I am genuinely committed to change. Jack Harper, watching from the sidelines, nodded in quiet approval at her response. As time passed, Emily's dedication began to bear fruit. The workshops she helped develop received positive feedback from employees. Her personal story, shared openly during training sessions, resonated deeply with many, especially those struggling with their own biases. Gradually, the skepticism surrounding her began to fade. Colleagues who once avoided her now sought her advice. Even Ethan Taylor, once her harshest critic, started to open up. One day, after a particularly successful workshop, Jack Harper pulled Emily aside. You're doing great, he said with a warm smile. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Emily felt a surge of emotion rise within her. Thank you, she said softly. This opportunity has changed my life. I just hope I'm making a difference. Jack nodded. You are. People are beginning to see that change is possible, and that's a powerful message. As Emily left the office that evening, a sense of purpose enveloped her. For the first time, she felt a genuine hope for the future, even knowing the road ahead would still hold challenges. In the months that followed, the cultural transformation within the airline gained momentum. Both passengers and employees noticed a marked improvement in customer service quality and inclusivity across all aspects of the travel experience. One sunny afternoon, Jack Harper sat in his office, reviewing the latest feedback reports. A smile spread across his face as he read glowing comments praising the airline's renewed commitment to diversity and respect. Mr. Harper, his assistant called, peeking her head into the room. You might want to see this. She handed him a tablet displaying a major news article. The headline read, Airlines Cultural Reformation Sets a New Industry Standard. Jack skimmed through the article, pride swelling in his chest. It detailed the airline's positive changes, from improved staff training to more inclusive policies. Particularly, it highlighted how these reforms had led to a significant rise in customer satisfaction and employee morale. Meanwhile, Emily Carter was leading a training session for new flight attendants. As she shared her personal journey, she saw the attentive faces of her audience. "I used to think I was just doing my job," Emily admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But I've learned that my actions have a far-reaching impact. Facing my own biases wasn't easy, but it has made me a better person and a better employee." After the session, a young trainee approached Emily. "Your story is truly inspiring," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "It makes me believe that change is really possible." Emily felt a warm wave of gratitude wash over her. She was making the difference she had hoped for. That weekend, Jack Harper convened a company-wide meeting to discuss the progress of the cultural transformation. Standing before the assembled staff, he felt a deep sense of pride. "The changes we've made aren't just good for our passengers," Jack said, his voice echoing through the room. "They're good for all of us. We're creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected." He paused, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Emily Carter. "And I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has become a symbol of this change. Emily Carter, would you please stand?" Emily stood, her cheeks flushed as every eye turned to her. Jack continued, "Emily's journey, from acknowledging her mistakes to becoming a leader in our Cultural Sensitivity Initiative, proves that change is possible when we confront our biases and learn from them." A round of applause filled the room. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat, her eyes welling with tears as she saw respect and admiration in the faces of her colleagues, where there had once been doubt and distrust. After the meeting, Jack approached Emily. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished," he said warmly. "Your story is inspiring people to reevaluate their own biases and embrace change." Emily nodded, her heart full of a mix of humility and pride. "Thank you for giving me this chance," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined I could make such a difference." As she stood at the front of the training room days later, her heart raced. She felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement. Looking out at the diverse faces of her audience, Emily took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady and compelling. "Today, we're here to talk about something that goes beyond policies or customer service techniques," she said. "We're here to understand the impact of our actions on others." Emily's story had transformed her, and now it was helping transform others. In her heart, she knew her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she was ready to face it with hope and determination. Emily Carter shared stories of passengers who had faced discrimination, giving the new employees a deeper understanding of the real-world impact such actions could have. "Every interaction we have with a passenger is an opportunity," she said, her voice growing more resolute. "An opportunity to make someone feel valued, respected, and welcomed. But it's also a chance to cause harm." Throughout the training, Emily encouraged the participants to share their thoughts and experiences. The room came alive with candid discussions, many employees opening up about their own biases and fears. One participant raised her hand, saying, "I never realized how small actions could have such a profound impact. Your story makes me want to reevaluate my behavior." Emily smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest like a gentle wave. "This is why I do this," she thought to herself, "to help others understand and grow, just as I did." As the session ended, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her. She saw determination on the faces of the trainees, a reflection of the resolve she had felt at the start of her own journey. "Remember," she said as they prepared to leave, "empathy and respect aren't just words. They're choices we make every day, and those choices have the power to change someone's life." Jack Harper stood quietly at the back of the training room, watching Emily with a mix of pride and admiration. The woman leading the session with such passion and empathy was a far cry from the flight attendant he had met months ago, whose biases had sparked a painful confrontation. As he observed her guiding the trainees through an exercise on recognizing unconscious biases, he couldn't help but reflect on their shared journey. He recalled the sting of that initial incident, the surge of anger he'd felt, and his decision to take a different path, not one of retaliation, but one of understanding and transformation. The airline had undergone a remarkable cultural shift. What was once a company riddled with complaints about racial discrimination was now lauded as a model of inclusion within the industry. Jack's reforms had taken root, fostering a culture of respect and understanding that permeated every level of the organization. Emily concluded the session with a message that resonated deeply. Every interaction we have is an opportunity to show someone they are valued and respected. Our words and actions carry power. Let's use that power for good. The trainees nodded, their faces reflecting the same determination Jack had once seen in Emily when she vowed to change. It was a powerful reminder of the progress they had made together. As the session wrapped up, Jack approached Emily. "That was incredible," he said warmly. "You've truly found your calling." Emily's eyes glistened, tears threatening to fall. "I never thought I'd be here," she admitted. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." Jack smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. He realized that the truest form of justice wasn't in punishing those who wronged us, but in helping them become better versions of themselves. By doing so, they hadn't just transformed Emily and the airline. They had set in motion a ripple effect of positive change. "We've learned so much," Jack said, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "And look at what we've accomplished together." Glancing around the training room filled with eager employees ready to carry the message of inclusion and respect to every corner of the airline, Jack felt a deep sense of hope. They had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for change, proving that empathy and the pursuit of justice could lead to the most rewarding form of redemption. As he left the room, Jack thought to himself, this isn't just a victory for Emily or the airline. It's a testament to the power of compassion and the belief that change is always possible.